My name is Ethan Blake. I'm 34 years old, born in Des Moines, Iowa, and I work as a freelance investigative journalist. Over the course of my career, I've found myself in strange places, covering forgotten conflicts, knocking on doors of people who preferred to be left alone. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I found in Bosnia, in a village called Kolovrat. The journey began with a letter, a real letter, the kind written by hand on yellowed paper that smelled like mildew. It was delivered to my apartment in Chicago. No postage stamp, no return address, as if it had traveled through time rather than the ocean. Inside, there was only one sentence, written in shaky handwriting. If you want to know the truth about your grandfather, go to Kolovrat. I didn't know much about my grandfather. My father rarely spoke of him. The official story was that he had died during World War II, but the details were always vague. My father said he had disappeared somewhere in Eastern Europe. There was no grave, no death certificate, no old letters, just a black and white portrait and an uncomfortable silence every time I asked. Curiosity ate at me for days. At first, I tried to ignore it. Then I did some digging. I found out Kolovrat was a tiny village in the Bosnian countryside, close to the Serbian border. Population just over 100. No significant records. A few scattered mentions in urban explorer forums, ruins, dense forests, rumors about an abandoned church. The decision came on a rainy night with a glass of whiskey in my hand and a hollow feeling in my chest I couldn't explain. I booked a flight to Sarajevo. I arrived in the Bosnian capital in the heart of winter. The wind bit through my coat and the sky hung heavy like lead. The city was a blend of beauty and scars, minarets, war ruins, graffiti-covered walls. I spent 2 days there trying to find someone who knew how to get to Kolovrat. Most people frowned when I mentioned the name. One taxi driver flat out refused to take me, saying, "No sane man goes there this time of year." I met Milorad in a roadside bar. He was a large man with a graying beard and wary eyes. He spoke English with a heavy accent. When I mentioned Kolovrat, he just shook his head and said, "Dead place, dead people. You won't find what you're looking for." "And what do you think I'm looking for?" I asked, testing him. He stared at me for a few seconds before answering. "Ghosts. Only ghosts live there now." Still, the next morning he showed up with an old Jeep and agreed to take me. The journey took hours. Dirt roads, sharp turns, fog-covered mountains. My cell signal vanished before we were even halfway there. When we finally arrived, it was already getting dark. Kolovrat felt frozen in time. Stone houses with curved rooftops, shuttered windows, no children playing, no barking dogs. The few people I saw looked at me like I was a bad omen. An elderly couple passed by carrying firewood and turned their faces as soon as they saw me. Milorad stopped the car in what looked like the village square. A dry fountain, a rusted bench, and a broken statue of some unknown saint. "This is where you get out. I'll be back in 3 days. If you're not here, I'm leaving anyway." "Why 3 days?" I asked. "Because that's how it's done," he said, and drove off before I could ask anything else. I stood there, backpack on my shoulder, with a growing feeling that I was making a mistake. But something irrational, instinctive, kept pulling me forward. I found lodging in a simple house owned by a woman named Mira. She didn't speak English, but it seemed like she had been expecting me. She just pointed to a room on the second floor and handed me a set of keys, not even a smile. That night, I had the first strange dream. I was walking through an open field, snow up to my knees. A man walked ahead of me, tall, wearing an old military overcoat. When I caught up to him, he turned around. It was the same face from the old portrait of my grandfather, but his eyes were empty, completely black. He opened his mouth to say something, but all I heard was the sound of distant bells, ringing in a pattern that felt wrong. I woke up sweating, the sound still echoing in my head. Beside the bed, there was something I was certain hadn't been there before. A rusted medallion with a swirling sun symbol. On the back, written in Serbo-Croatian, "To return is to forget. To follow is to know." I picked up the medallion, looked out the window, and saw something impossible. A figure, standing in the middle of the road, motionless, watching. Morning came slowly, like the light itself was reluctant to touch Kolovrat. I woke up to the sound of wind pressing against the wooden shutters and the occasional groan of old beams settling. My breath fogged the cold air. There was no central heating, only a small iron stove in the corner of the room that had long gone cold. Downstairs, Mira had left a plate of hard bread, a boiled egg, and something that looked like cheese. She wasn't there. In fact, the house was utterly silent. I stepped outside, wrapped in my coat and scarf, and looked around. The village was even quieter in daylight. The houses were scattered along narrow, cracked paths, many of them abandoned, with windows boarded up or glass long shattered. A dog barked somewhere far off and was quickly silenced. Smoke rose lazily from a few chimneys, but I saw no one out. No children, no voices. I walked to the square where Milorad had left me. The statue of the saint had a crack running through its face, and moss clung to its stone robes. The fountain basin was dry, filled with frozen leaves. I looked up at the sky, gray again. It seemed like the clouds here never moved. I took out the medallion I'd found the night before. The metal was cold against my skin. The symbol, a swirling sun, looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. I snapped a photo with my camera and made a mental note to research it later, assuming I ever got a signal again. I started walking with no real direction, just trying to get a feel for the place, maybe find someone willing to talk. After half an hour of wandering, I saw an old woman hanging laundry behind one of the homes. Her hands trembled from the cold, and her posture was hunched. When I approached her and greeted her in English, she flinched and turned her back to me. "Excuse me," I tried again. "Do you speak English?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed toward the woods that bordered the village, and then quickly made the sign of the cross over her chest. Before I could ask what she meant, she dropped her laundry basket and went inside, slamming the door behind her. I followed her gesture toward the edge of the village, where the cobbled road faded into a dirt path leading into the forest. It looked ancient. The trees were tall and gnarled, leaning together like they were sharing secrets. I didn't plan to go deep, just enough to see where the path led. About 50 yards in, I found something strange. A wooden post with carved markings, almost like runes. On top of it was a crude effigy made of branches and animal bones, tied together with black string. Hanging from its neck was another medallion, identical to mine. Suddenly, the air felt heavier. Not colder, just heavier, like the forest was watching. I backed away, but something behind me caught my eye. A woman. She stood deeper into the woods, maybe 30 feet away, partially hidden by the trees. She wore a dark shawl, and her long black hair fell over her shoulders like a curtain. I could barely make out her face, but her eyes were open, wide, and unblinking. I blinked. She was gone. I spun in place, heart racing. Nothing. Just trees and silence. Back in the village, I found a small building with a faded sign, Dom Zayednitsa, the community house. The door was unlocked. Inside, the place was dusty and abandoned, with broken chairs stacked in corners and old posters peeling from the walls. But on the far end, I saw a corkboard filled with yellowed photos and documents. Most were written in Cyrillic, but one caught my eye. A photograph of a group of soldiers, American by their uniforms, standing in front of a house that looked eerily familiar. One of the men in the photo looked like my grandfather. I took a closer look, holding my breath. Someone had drawn over his eyes with ink, thick black circles. Under the photo, written in faded red pencil, "They should not have stayed past the third night." Chills ran down my spine. I took a picture of the board, but my camera lens fogged. When I wiped it and tried again, the camera wouldn't turn on. Dead, fully charged the night before. I left quickly. That evening, I tried speaking with Mira. I asked if she knew the man in the photo, or if she remembered Americans being in Kolovrat. She shook her head, but her eyes darted toward the stove. Then she reached into her apron pocket and handed me something. A small key, old, rusty. She said only one word in English. "Church." Then she walked away and didn't look back. I asked around the next day and found a boy, maybe 12, who pointed me toward the church ruins just outside the village. I followed a cracked stone path, half covered by snow. The building was skeletal, with only its stone frame still standing. The roof had collapsed decades ago. The bell tower was leaning, and an iron cross lay half buried in the ground. Inside, under broken beams and ivy-covered walls, I found a trap door near the altar. The key fit. It opened with a loud, reluctant groan. A staircase spiraled down into darkness. The air that rose from below was cold and damp, and it smelled of mold and something older, like earth that hadn't been touched in 100 years. I hesitated. Then I heard something, so faint I could almost believe I imagined it. A whisper, calling my name. Ethan. The air inside the stairwell was colder than the world above it. Not just in temperature, it felt old, stale, untouched by sunlight or wind. I descended slowly, using the flashlight from my bag. The beam flickered once, then held steady. The walls were stone, damp with age, and the steps creaked beneath my weight, even though they were made of solid wood. At the bottom, I found a small chamber, low ceiling, stone walls, no windows. There were signs of ritual. A crude altar sat in the center of the room. Nothing grand, just a flat slab with black stains I didn't want to identify. All around the room were markings carved into the stone, similar to the swirling sun on the medallion. Some were symbols, others were words in a language I couldn't recognize. Near the altar, several objects had been left behind. Withered flowers, animal bones, melted wax, a broken locket. And in the corner, a coat. An old U.S. military coat. I knelt to examine it. The name tag had been torn off, but the patch on the sleeve was intact. 45th Infantry Division. That was the same division my grandfather had served in. I recognized it from a photo my father once showed me. I took a step back, trying to breathe through the mounting pressure in my chest. Then the flashlight flickered again. I tapped it. Darkness swallowed me. I froze. The air shifted. I could hear my breath and something else, breathing that wasn't mine. Soft. Behind me. I turned the flashlight back on, hand shaking. Nothing. But on the altar, something had changed. A new object had appeared, an old photograph, faded and crumpled. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. It was me, standing at the edge of the village next to Milorad's jeep, same coat, same expression. The exact moment I had arrived 2 days ago. I hadn't taken this photo. I hadn't even seen anyone with a camera.
I left the chamber in a haze, climbed the stairs 2 steps at a time, and slammed the trapdoor shut behind me. My heart was pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. I stumbled out of the church ruins, not stopping until I was back near the square. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time. Mira didn't ask why. She just placed a mug of herbal tea on the table and pointed to the window. "Stay inside," she said in English, "no matter what you hear." She left without saying another word. I tried to sleep, but the house creaked and whispered like it was breathing. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate. They stopped outside my door. I held my breath, staring at the doorknob. It turned, just a fraction, then stopped. After a long minute, the steps moved away. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I found a note under my door. It was written in tight, frantic handwriting. No signature, no explanation, just one line. "The woods took the last American who asked questions." I needed answers. I went to the edge of the village and waited. Eventually, the boy who had shown me the way to the church came by again. I offered him chocolate from my bag. His eyes lit up. I asked him slowly if anyone else had come to Kolovrat recently. He shook his head. "Amerikanets, long ago," he said, pointing to the hills. "He didn't come back." "What happened to him?" The boy hesitated. Then he traced a circle in the snow with his finger, mimicking the medallion symbol. Kolovrat. It means turning sun. If you go too deep, it turns you too. Then he ran. I spent the rest of that day in silence, moving carefully through the village, avoiding the paths that led to the woods. I kept the medallion in my pocket, though I felt its weight even when it wasn't touching me. It had become more than just a piece of metal. It pulsed, subtly, like it had a heartbeat of its own. I checked it once and thought for just a second that the symbol had shifted slightly. Maybe it was the light, or maybe I was losing my grip. That afternoon, I returned to the community house. The wind had blown the front door half open, creaking back and forth on rusty hinges. Inside, dust swirled through slivers of gray sunlight. I searched deeper this time, behind the shelves and filing cabinets. In the bottom of a drawer, I found what I didn't know I was looking for: a leather-bound journal, brittle with age. The first few pages were written in Serbo-Croatian, but near the middle, the language shifted to English. The handwriting was precise, neat, military-like. It was a field journal. The name on the inside cover? Lieutenant James T. Blake. My grandfather. My hand shook as I flipped through the pages. The first few entries were mundane, notes about terrain, weather, occasional mentions of contact with locals. Then things changed. Locals avoid the woods past sundown. Superstition or something else. An old woman told us the village has a wound that never closed. Private Downs heard chanting in the forest last night. No one else heard it. He hasn't spoken since. I dreamed of a sun turning backward. The locals call it Kolovrat. They say it traps souls, feeding on the guilt of those who wander too far into its reach. I'm beginning to believe we weren't sent here for reconnaissance. We're being watched, studied even.
not by the villagers, by something older. The final entry was dated 3 days before his official disappearance. I found the altar. I should have never gone alone. It showed me things, memories that weren't mine. I think Kolovrat knows me now. It wants something. I closed the journal slowly, trying to steady my breath. If this was real, if these entries were truly written by my grandfather, it meant everything my father had said was a lie, or worse, a cover-up. The sound of wind outside rose into a howl, like a cry from the forest. I didn't want to believe it. I'm not a superstitious man, but there was a weight in this place, psychic, historical, spiritual. Whatever word you choose, it pressed on the bones. And something else had shifted. The villagers began to avoid me completely, not just turning away, disappearing when I walked near. Doors shut, curtains pulled. Even Mira stopped answering when I knocked. I became a ghost in Kolovrat. That evening, I sat alone in my room with the journal open, the medallion lying beside it. I looked at the swirling sun symbol again and realized something that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just spinning, it was reversing.
I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The journal lay open beside me, and the medallion pulsed faintly on the wooden table, like it was breathing. The air in the room felt thinner with each passing hour. Outside, the wind howled, and the trees beyond the window swayed like they were whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear. At some point, maybe near dawn, I made a decision. I couldn't leave without knowing. Not anymore. Something had pulled my grandfather into this place, and whatever it was, it hadn't let go. Now it had touched me too. If I turned my back and left, I wouldn't just be walking away from the truth. I'd be walking into a shadow that would follow me forever. I returned to the ruins of the church. This time, I wasn't afraid. Or maybe I was, but I'd passed the point where fear mattered. The sky was gray as ever, and the trees around the ruin stood silent, as if holding its breath. I pried open the trap door and descended with a lantern and the journal in hand. The chamber below hadn't changed, but it felt different now. Not hostile, not welcoming either, just aware. I approached the altar, this time not as an intruder, but as someone seeking audience. I opened the journal to the last entry and read it aloud. It showed me things, memories that weren't mine. I think Kolovrat knows me now. It wants something. Then I placed the medallion on the altar. Nothing happened at first. Then, light. A slow, pulsing glow radiated from the medallion, seeping into the cracks of the stone. The room shuddered. Dust fell from the ceiling. I stepped back as a low hum filled the air, vibrating through my chest like the beginning of a storm. And then, the wall behind the altar opened. Not like a door, more like a wound tearing itself open, revealing a tunnel carved into the stone. Darkness stretched beyond it, thick and absolute. I stepped inside. The air was colder here. The passage sloped downward, deeper than I expected. The walls were covered in the same swirling sun symbols, but now they moved, slowly, subtly, like they were alive. I followed the tunnel for what felt like hours, though my watch had stopped ticking. The only sound was my own breath and a distant rhythmic chanting. It was the same chant from my dreams. As I got closer, the walls began to bleed light, faintly orange like the end of twilight. The tunnel widened into a vast underground chamber, an amphitheater of sorts. Carved stone seats surrounded a massive circle on the ground, etched with symbols, bones, and candle stubs. At its center stood 7 figures in hooded cloaks, chanting in a language I couldn't recognize. And in the middle of them, suspended in the air by invisible threads, was a man. Old. Thin. Eyes closed. My heart stopped. It was my grandfather. He hadn't aged normally. He looked preserved but drained, like something had kept him barely alive for decades. I stepped forward, and one of the hooded figures turned toward me. Its face was not human, or perhaps it had once been. Its skin was stretched too tight, eyes too black, mouth too wide. It didn't speak, but I felt its voice in my mind. You are his blood. You crossed the veil. You carry the mark. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. My limbs felt heavy. The chanting grew louder. Another voice cut through it. My grandfather's. Weak. Cracked. Ethan. He opened his eyes just slightly, and his lips trembled. You have to break it. Break what? I managed to whisper. He turned his head toward the medallion around my neck. They used us to open the door, but only our blood can close it. Everything happened at once. The 7 figures began to move toward me. The circle on the floor ignited with fire. My body moved on instinct. I ripped the medallion from my neck and threw it into the center of the flames. A scream rose, not from a human throat, but from the earth itself. The chamber shook violently. Cracks spiderwebbed across the walls. The hooded figures collapsed into ash one by one. The fire turned white hot, and a wind blasted through the tunnel behind me. My grandfather fell. I ran to him, catching him before he hit the stone. His eyes searched mine, and he smiled. Just a little. I waited. Then he exhaled and went still. I don't remember climbing out. I only remember the sunlight, real sunlight, warming my face as I collapsed outside the ruins. For the first time in days, the clouds had parted. The wind was calm. Kolovrat was silent, but it no longer watched. Millerrat arrived that afternoon. He didn't speak when he saw me, just nodded. We drove away in silence, and Kolovrat disappeared behind the trees, as if it had never existed at all.
When I landed back in Chicago, the sky was clear, cold but blue, familiar. The kind of sky that makes you think everything strange you've experienced was just a fever dream, just a story you told yourself to survive something else. But Kolovrat wasn't a story. I still had the journal, I still had the coat, and I still had the ash. The first week back was strange, but manageable. I slept in short bursts, waking with the phantom sensation of chanting in my ears. I chalked it up to stress, nightmares, trauma. I'd seen things most people wouldn't believe. That's what I told myself. But something was wrong. Subtle at first. Lights in my apartment flickering. Shadows that seemed to linger too long in corners. My cat, Theo, stared at walls for minutes at a time, growling low, ears flattened. Then came the smells. Earth, burnt wax, wet stone. The smell of that underground chamber rising from my bathroom drain. I tried returning to work, but everything I wrote came out twisted, dark. Nothing made sense on the page. I reread a draft I'd typed at 3 a.m. and found a sentence that hadn't been written by me. You opened the wound. You carry the mark. I deleted it, but it reappeared the next day. I went to a therapist. She listened mostly, took notes, told me I might be experiencing a form of delayed psychosis or PTSD. She asked about my dreams. I lied and told her they'd stopped. They hadn't. In my dreams, I walked through the woods behind Kolovrat. Always the same path, always the same feeling, being followed. Sometimes I'd turn and see the woman, the one with the long black hair, half hidden behind trees. Sometimes I saw my grandfather, still suspended in the air, eyes open now, watching me, judging me. Sometimes I saw myself, but it wasn't me. 3 weeks after returning, I started hearing the bell, always at 3:17 a.m. One clear ring, as if from far away. No matter where I was, bedroom, couch, shower, I'd hear it once, crisp, hollow, like it came from under the floorboards. I called my building manager. He checked the pipes, wiring, HVAC, nothing. Said everything looked fine. "Maybe it's in your head," he offered, half joking. Maybe it was. But then the photo appeared. It was taped to my refrigerator. The same photo I'd found in the church chamber, the one of me arriving in Kolovrat next to Milored's Jeep. Except this time, the background was different. Behind me, barely visible between the trees, was the shadow of a figure, tall, watching. I hadn't printed the photo. I hadn't brought any physical copies home. I took it down and burned it in the kitchen sink. The next morning, it was back. Same spot. This time, the figure was closer. I reached out to a friend in Washington, a former intelligence contact I trusted. I told him part of the story, omitting the more unbelievable parts. He promised to dig around about Kolovrat, the 45th Infantry, and any classified post-World War II missions involving experimental operations in Eastern Europe. He called me back the next day. "I found something weird," he said. "There are orders from 1946 referencing Kolovrat, but then total blackout. The names of the soldiers on the mission roster were redacted, every single one, including your grandfather." "Why?" I asked. "The redactions weren't done by the military. The document was sealed by a civilian department, something called Office of Anthropological Containment. Ever heard of it?" I hadn't. Neither had he. He promised to keep looking. He didn't call again. The next night, I found scratches on my living room wall, tiny grooves spiraling outward from a center point, the Kolovrat symbol. I painted over them the next morning, but I found the same markings on my bedroom window the night after that, and on my bathroom mirror the day after that. It finally broke me when Theo, my cat, refused to enter my apartment. He stood in the hallway, staring through the open door, fur bristled, growling deep in his throat. When I tried to pick him up, he clawed my arm and ran. I haven't seen him since. I returned to the journal. Rereading my grandfather's words, I began to suspect something I hadn't dared to consider before. What if breaking the altar chamber didn't close the wound? What if it opened it fully? What if I hadn't stopped the ritual, but completed it? What if Kolovrat hadn't let me leave? What if it came with me? I began seeing things in reflections, not just flickers, faces, in mirrors, windows, my turned-off laptop screen. They stared back, not angry, not kind, just present, watching. I haven't been able to write since, but I keep recording this because if something happens to me, if I disappear the way my grandfather did, someone needs to know. Kolovrat isn't a place. It's a force. It burrows. It waits. And once it knows your name, it never forgets.
It started with a whisper. At first, I thought it was static, interference from the old radio on my desk or the pipes in the walls. But then the whisper formed words. My name, repeated over and over. Ethan. Ethan. I unplugged everything in my apartment. The whisper didn't stop. It just moved closer. I stopped leaving the apartment. Every time I did, I felt eyes on me, through car windows, reflections, even from the sky. Birds sat perfectly still, lined up on the power lines, following me with their heads tilted like puppets. I went out one afternoon to buy food, and a child on the street, no older than 6, pointed at me and said, in a voice not her own, "You brought the wound here." Her mother pulled her away, laughing nervously. I went home and didn't go out again. The walls started bleeding. Not real blood, more like moisture, dark and thick, seeping from the edges of the Kolovrat symbols that kept appearing overnight. I'd wake up and find them on the ceiling, etched into my floor, or drawn in dust on the inside of the window pane. One morning, I opened my eyes and found one drawn directly on my chest, in ink. I had no markers, no paint, no pens near the bed, and it wouldn't wash off. I recorded everything, audio, video, photos, but the moment I tried to replay or upload anything, the files glitched, audio distorted, images corrupted, video turned black except for the symbol. It didn't want to be shared. It only wanted me. The dreams became worse. I wasn't just walking through the woods anymore. I was becoming the woods. Trees grew through my arms, my feet rooted into the ground, my mouth opened and released smoke. Sometimes, in the dream, I could see the village again, but it was in ruins, covered in vines, swallowed by the earth. And always, standing at the center of it, was the woman in the black shawl, her face still hidden. Only now, she spoke. "The spiral turns because you keep walking." When I asked what that meant, she turned to face me, and her face was mine, rotting. I tried calling Milorad. No answer. Then late one night, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Static. Then a voice. "Kolovrat never ends. You just found your place in it." Click. Desperately, I visited a local folklorist, someone who studied Eastern European mythology. I told him it was research for a book. He listened as I described the symbols, the chanting, the altar, the name Kolovrat. He grew pale. He said the spiral sun predated Christianity, linked to cycles of death and rebirth, seasons, sacrifice. But some versions were darker, twisted. He said certain cults believed the Kolovrat wasn't a symbol of hope. It was a trap, a recursive ritual, an Ouroboros, but alive, a machine made of memory and blood. He said, "It doesn't kill you, it recycles you." The phrase haunted me. It recycles you. Was that what had happened to my grandfather? Was that what was happening to me? Was I becoming part of the pattern? The altar hadn't demanded my life. It had demanded continuity, and I had given it my bloodline. I went days without sleeping, without eating. The whispers grew louder until I no longer heard silence, just the endless low hum of Kolovrat, like it was spinning in the back of my skull. One night, I blacked out. When I came to, I was standing in front of a mirror, carving the symbol into the wall with a key.
My mouth moved on its own, whispering a language I didn't know. I boarded up my windows, unplugged everything, burned the journal. It didn't work. The next morning, the journal was back on my desk, open to a page that hadn't been there before. In my own handwriting. "You've gone too far now. You're not Ethan anymore. You are the spiral." And then the door knocked, not loudly, just once, and then again, and then again. Every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., the knock came. I never opened it, but the whisper followed it, and it always said the same thing. "Let us finish what your bloodline began." I stopped resisting the knock. I no longer jumped when it came. I no longer checked the time. I knew what it would say. 3:17 a.m. Every night, like clockwork, the same soft knock, followed by the voice, "Let us finish what your blood began." But this time, I answered. The hallway beyond my door was dark, silent, empty. But I knew something had changed. The building around me, the pipes, the walls, the floors, they no longer felt like my home. They pulsed. The hum was back, deeper now, vibrating under the soles of my feet like a warning or a summons. I walked outside barefoot, wearing nothing but a coat and the military patch I'd kept from Kolovrat sewn into the pocket. Snow fell gently, even though it was late spring. The world around me was folding inward. I walked for what felt like hours, through alleys that led to fields that shouldn't exist, down streets I'd never seen, through doors that belonged to other buildings but opened into memories I hadn't lived. I was walking through layers, time, space, self, until I reached the clearing, a perfect circle in a black forest that couldn't possibly exist in Chicago. At the center stood the altar. It wasn't the one from Kolovrat. It was older, made of bone and stone and root. It breathed, it waited. 7 figures stood around it, cloaked in shadows, faceless and tall. They weren't men, they were echoes, reflections, archetypes, the custodians of the spiral. And standing beside the altar was myself. Not a doppelganger, not a twin, just me. But deeper, stripped of hesitation, of fear. He wore the medallion I had destroyed, and he smiled. "You brought us here," he said. His voice was mine, but smoother, hollowed. "No," I said. "I tried to stop it." "You finished it." He stepped aside, revealing what lay on top of the altar. Theo, my cat, still, lifeless, an offering. I staggered back. "I didn't," he said. "You did. Every word you wrote, every dream you remembered, every time you refused to forget Kolovrat, you called it closer. You didn't break the cycle, you replaced your grandfather in it." He placed a hand on the altar, and it pulsed with light. "You are the story now."
The 7 figures began to chant, low, rhythmic, familiar. It was the chant from my dreams, from my grandfather's journal, from beneath the church. It wasn't just sound, it was movement. I felt my bones responding, my lungs filling and emptying to the rhythm,
my fingers twitching in sync with the pulse of the earth. The Kolovrat was spinning again, and I was at its center. I stepped toward the altar, and I saw it clearly. There was no escape. There never had been. My grandfather hadn't vanished. He had become the spiral. He had bought my life with his place in the pattern, and now it was my turn. I could choose, I realized. Resist and be dragged into the cycle, screaming, broken, spread across 1,000 dreams for the next soul to inherit, or offer myself willingly and preserve the line, preserve the story, control its telling. I laid my hand on the altar. The figures stopped chanting. Silence, heavy and waiting. Then I spoke. Let it be me. The spiral burned into the stone, into my skin. My body froze, but my mind expanded. Memories poured into me, lives I hadn't lived, names I'd never known, places lost to time. I saw the first bearer of the mark. I saw every sacrifice made to keep the door open, every attempt to shut it, every failure, every scream. And then, stillness. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my apartment. No altar, no figures, no blood, just the journal on my desk and the medallion, restored, waiting. I live quietly now. I walk the world like a shadow. The humming never stops, but I've learned to walk with it. I write sometimes, bits of stories. People call them fiction. They're not. They're warnings. Because one day, someone like you will read them, and they'll feel the pull, and they'll go looking for Kolovrat, and the spiral will turn again.